All right, this is going to be part one of an overview of chapter 2, where we look at the two major types of research methods, quantitative and qualitative research. Now, what I've got here is PowerPoint notes that cover things from the chapter that I consider to be most important, but I also have highlighted here, as you can see with my blue marker, those things that I think are particularly interesting, and then I'm going to focus on in terms of this lecture. And so, you want to pay particular attention to these points that I highlight, because those are the ones that are most likely to show up on quizzes, that sort of thing. My goal is always, when I do these PowerPoint notes and review the chapter, is the chapters are many pages. This textbook is really overstuffed and has too much stuff in it for things that you really need to know. And so I feel like one of my jobs is to help sift through those items that are more important and those that are less important, to help prioritize what's most important and help you study so you can do well on the quizzes in this course. Okay, so this first slide here, first of all, let's talk just for a moment about theory. It says theory and research. The chapter is going over, what are the sort of different strategies or approaches that we use to try to conduct a study. They don't really introduce it here very well, but let me just say that what this course is about is all of the different things that you read in your various textbooks in different classes, and the things that you'll also hear about in the media or read in the newspaper, see on TV. That's a study. These are all careful ways to try to come up with answers of what's going on out there in the world. These studies are careful ways of trying to answer questions about what's real in the world, and to go beyond just our hunches, our kind of common sense understanding, our own beliefs, wherever they came from, about what's real and what's actually happening out there. The purpose of this research is to try to be much more careful and systematic in coming up with these answers, and not just relying on our hunches or opinions wherever they might come from. Okay, so that's what this course is all about. Basically it's the methods, the strategies, the rules about how to answer these questions correctly, carefully, in the best possible way, in a scientific way, if you will. And so that's what all of this is about. Is a lot of details and specifics about how to do a study properly, and the pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses of all the different ways of doing things. So that's just to get us started here of what we're going to be doing in this course. Now, even though this is a course about how to do a study, theory is important here. You might have taken some theory courses. If you're sociology, criminology majors, you may have taken some courses on sociological theories, for example, or criminological theories. And what a theory is about is it's a big explanation or a big attempt at an explanation, and it may not necessarily be very true or valid. Trying to explain some important thing that we care about. As someone who teaches criminology, I tend to be really interested in questions, for example, like, well, why does someone become a criminal? Why does someone become a violent person, a murderer? Where does that come from, right? And so the theories are an important place to start, because they are explanations that people have come up with in the past to try to explain these things. They might be true, they may not be, but they're at least guide us towards looking at and studying these things. So what do we mean by theory? The first point that we have here, we have what type of theory. There's different types that I don't want to get into that right now, with the different types of theories that you can choose and select to guide you when you're doing research. But all I want to do here is make sure we know what we're talking about when we talk about what is a theory. And so a theory is just a big explanation that tries to attempt to explain whatever it is we're interested in learning about. In my case, it's usually, honestly, most of the time I'm studying violence. Why are people violent? And there's various theories explaining that. So what you're trying to do with the theory is to explain observed regularities, is what the PowerPoint note here is means. What we mean observed regularities is you see certain behaviors and you see them quite often and regularly from year to year to year. Even though homicide is a terrible crime, it never goes away. We have thousands of them every year in the United States, and they never disappear. They're regular problems, serious problems that every society faces. Some societies have more, some societies have fewer homicides, but everybody's got a violence problem. So that's what we mean. Observed irregularities are things that happen again and again that you can observe, that you can collect information on and learn about them because they're happening regularly. Okay, so that's what they mean by this. What do we mean when we're talking about theories? Now the next point here is you see them getting into different types of theories that I don't need to spend time on right now. A little bit less important for our purposes. Now, you see on this next slide that the heading here says empiricism. And what we mean by empiricism is it's a philosophical approach to theorizing. And that just means that empiricism is something that kind of comes from philosophy. And what the idea is behind this approach is that only knowledge gained will be gained through sensory experiences. Only this is acceptable. So it's basically, in a nutshell, a philosophy that if you want to learn about something, you need to be able to observe it with your five senses. You need to be able to see it, you need to be able to hear it, smell it, touch it, that kind of thing. And through our sensory equipment that humans have, we're able to learn about our world. And so science is based on this approach that whatever we can observe, we can learn about it through careful study. But if it's something that can't be observed, let's say, for example, it's a spiritual phenomenon, it's something that you can't see, you can't observe, you can't put under a microscope, then that's something that's really beyond the realm of science or this empiricism. It's something that science wouldn't study. It wouldn't study something that you can't observe with your senses. That doesn't mean that it's somehow not real or that it's something not worth studying or not worth knowing about. It's really kind of admitting that a scientific or empirical approach is limited, that it can't do everything. All it can do is study what we can see, hear, taste, feel, that kind of thing. And so it's actually admitting that there's certain things that are kind of beyond what science can discover. But empirical means what we can observe with the senses. And that's a foundation of a scientific approach to whatever it is that we're studying. I underlined this word here, rigorous, highlighted that. Rigorous scientific testing of theory. So what they're getting at here is that if you take this empirical scientific approach, you'll have a theory, and a theory will say, for example, crime is caused because of people out there, and just to keep something really simple, the people out there in the population, some of them drink too much alcohol, have a problem with alcohol. Alcohol abuse leads to violence for people who can't handle drinking. And so here is a very simple, almost to the point where it's too simple to be a theory, it'd almost be a hypothesis. A hypothesis is just a simpler explanation for why something is happening. It's narrower and more specific. But anyway, just to keep things simple, let's look at this alcohol one. So if you were to do this empirical scientific approach, you'd say, okay, so this theory says that people who abuse alcohol are going to be at a higher risk of committing acts of violence compared to people who don't abuse alcohol. And so that's something that we can go test in the sense that we can collect data on people and we can find out, is it true that the people who are violent are the ones who abuse alcohol and people who don't abuse alcohol are not violent. How true is that if we go out and look at real live human beings out in the world, right? So, and then we do it very carefully the way we gather our data, and you'll learn all the different rules about how you do that properly. But if it's done properly, then we can kind of decide whether this theory is a good one or not a good one. Do the data back up the theory that alcohol abuse is behind violence or not, right? So that's what they mean by testing the theory. Now we see a big college level term, positivist epistemology. Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. What they mean by positivist epistemology, again, a lot of these in these early chapters, we sometimes draw on philosophy a little bit because that's the foundation that we go to for how we go about doing these studies properly. Because at the bottom of all disciplines, really, it's, philosophy is kind of at the bottom, the foundation for everything. So that's what we're doing here, is we're turning to philosophy. What they mean by this positivist epistemology is, let's take the word epistemology first. What that means is whenever you have ology on the end of something, that means the study of it, right? Epistemology is sort of like, how do we know? The study of how do we know things? How do we know something is true? How do we know something is real? How do we know for sure and validly that something is real? And so that's what epistemology means, is what's the path that we need to follow to find out truth, to find out what's true. Positivist is a term that refers to scientific methods being applied to human beings. Positivism is the view that you can learn about human beings by studying them using the same methods that you use to study plants and animals, and take whatever science you like, physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, the physical sciences, geology. That there's a scientific methods that's used to study all of these things. Well, the positivist approach says that we can use the same techniques that the scientists use to study humans, that humans are just a part of nature. That's what this philosophy says, that they're a part of nature and can be studied like a part of nature, like anything else. That's positivistic. Humans can be studied scientifically, and that's the proper, the epistemologically correct way that's going to lead us to truth, right? Is to use the scientific method on people. That's what that fancy term positivist epistemology means. Make sure you know that. These are all important things. So this type of empirical approach is all about data. It's all about facts that we can observe, and accumulating those facts and testing our theories, our explanations up against the facts. Are the facts consistent with our explanations, or do the facts contradict our theories? If the facts contradict our theories are no good. We need to throw them out and get a theory that's better in line with the facts. At the end of the day, this empirical approach, the facts are the deciders. They are the most important things. Whatever the facts say, we have to respect those and follow them. So just almost like, think of it like a criminal court, where it's all about evidence. If you want to prove that this person is guilty, I don't want to hear your opinion. I don't want to hear your hunch. I want evidence. I want witnesses. I want physical evidence. I want DNA evidence. I want video recordings. Evidence. That's facts, data, right? So scientific approach is the same kind of thing. Now, we get into one sort of criticism or people who are skeptical of this approach, is they think, well, that's probably a little naive, and to think that that you can study human beings the same way you can study the rest of nature, and that you can simply follow the scientific method of collecting data and testing theories just like any other kind of scientist, and you'll learn what you want to learn about humans. Some people will say that's kind of naive to think that you can simply apply the scientific methods to people, and we'll talk about that more here in just a second. Let's move to the next slide. Let's see. This next slide is deductive and inductive theory, and it's two different ways, important ways to approach how we study we go about collecting a study. Let's see. Now, what I'm going to try to do with these videos is to break them up into small sections so we don't get too long in one particular section. So before I jump into these two, let me take a break here, pick it up in part 2.